All right, so what do you want to talk about the gift character of life that we were talking about like 2 years ago?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy enough to talk about anything at all, whatever you'd like to talk about.
All right, great. Let's just start there, I guess.
Okay.
What is the gift character of life? Is this something that's inherent in life, or is this a
Excuse me. I mean, I guess my own sense of it is that the expression the gift character it refers to, I guess, human life, or, well, for lack of a better word, a particular kind of sentience. So maybe it's not exclusively human. Maybe it's even within there's a certain sense, but it has to do with awareness of death and the condition of meaningfulness despite all the, I guess, the visible, material, obvious decay and loss and encumbrance of suffering. And so I think there's like a fact of um, biological growth and development, and then eventually decay and death. But the conditions of meaning and the meaningfulness of life all the way along, that's what turns what's otherwise a kind of just raw, meaningless, organismal or vegetative transpiring into meaningfulness, and I guess what we're going to call, life, that one could make something with or do something with. And it's that kind of stuff that I think is what I'm interested in terms of the gift.
right? So this is probably something that's exclusively tied into self-reflective beings.
Yes, yes, exactly. So the sort of self-reflexive consciousness is part of the gift. That is, if you wouldn't be a person who's born into a coma and then dies without ever having realized that they are, that's not the gift. And arguably, even organismal life, which never achieves anything more than, I guess, kind of the dull ache of hints of self-awareness that maybe comes from like a belly ache or from the resistance that's felt immediately against my immediate direct intentions, say in my environment. That's very different than the the possibility of thinking about oneself, of reckoning with oneself. And it's so important to stress that the gift isn't necessarily a good thing. Meaning isn't necessarily a good thing. Meaning is knowing good and evil. It's knowing. It's more than just experience. It's an added dimension to organismal experience.
Animals would not fit into this.
I think in general, yeah, I don't think that animals are creatures of meaning. I don't think they experience life as a gift. I don't think that they can see their own self consciousness in terms of its possible having not been.
Is it simply a narrative? In other words, is it a subjective or an objective value?
Um, I don't know if I'd call it even a value. I think it's a way of trying to state the awkwardness of having found oneself self consciously without having ever asked for it.
Wow.
It's an encumbrance of reflexive self awareness with no direct reason. It just comes out of nowhere. It's not like there was a me who did something and then who deserved to be self conscious. Somehow, here I am, beset by a world over there, and I'm over here.
Right.
And the gift character is like an awkward expression that's trying to capture the ontological status of that fact.
Right.
I don't know if it's really a value.
Well, values, all these things, narratives, meanings, purposes, these are assigned, are they not?
I think the human ontologically is a narrative being. And I think the gift, yeah, I mean, it may be that the gift character is part of the narrative consciousness that constitutes self-reflexive consciousness. Like, I don't think you could have a self-reflexive consciousness that isn't partly narrative.
So these are necessarily relative and subjective.
Yeah, that the odyssey of humanity is a temporal odyssey. It's not simply organismal growth and development and ontogenesis and things like that, although it's included in that. I mean, that's the precondition for the narrative to be intelligible, but the fact that life flows in a direction and that things move in a certain direction, that doesn't mean that all sentience is a narrative sentience, but I think that human consciousness is narrative.
Like animals don't need any of these things to exist and function.
Yeah, like I don't think they need stories in a way that humans, I think, actually do. I think we live by analogy and by story, and it doesn't really matter if there were three little pigs. You know, like if I suddenly say to you, haven't you heard it was all a ruse, there really were no three little pigs, no house of bricks. It doesn't matter. The question is, have you built your house out of bricks? And even there, I'm not talking about houses or bricks. I mean, the mind just works in metaphors.
Is a gift, is that the best, you think that's a word that best accurately describes what you're trying to...
Yeah, I really do. And I think gifts are often, in German, gift, it has the same root as poison. A gift is something that is undeserved. It's something that wasn't asked for. And the reason that I prefer the term is because I'm trying to account for why it feels good to, quote, give back. See, that to me is the most interesting question. That is, if I say that the human being is a being of meaning, and then I say, well, what does that mean? I say that somehow humans are able to gain meaning in their lives by, quote, giving back. Now, if I say they're giving back, that means they must experience themselves as having received something.
Is there any receiving or giving in this?
I guess why is life meaningful? Like, let's just say, for argument's sake, okay, let's begin with the claim that some people are able to gain meaning from life, generate meaning from life. Now, maybe that's all illusion. Maybe it's not true. But I'm going to say that there are people who do, and it comes from things like giving of themselves, producing things, whether it's through art, self-sacrifice by inconveniencing oneself to help another, to work in a soup kitchen. It could be a great artistic accomplishment or an athletic accomplishment, but it could be something just very mundane in a self-sacrificial way, just inconveniencing yourself when another is in need. Why does that feel good?
Is there a guilt aspect in this at all?
Well, I mean, I think guilt is another dimension of it. Yeah, that I think we would feel guilty having known at some level that we have received so much without having deserved it, earned it, or been ever really entitled to it.
There's the value assignment, right? To say that what we received, if we're receiving it, it's got to have a value to say that you're saying it's so much, it's...
Well, I know, but it's the we who is the gift, not what the we receives. I mean, let me try it a different way.
Okay.
And talk for a moment about near-death experiences. And as cheesy as this is, and I hate to give this example, I think it helps clarify it. There is a Christian post. There's a Christian poster which has this footprints in the sand, and it says, here are the footprints of the Lord and I walking together. And then at the times when I was at my hardest or my roughest, my loneliest, whatever, I looked down and there's only one foot in 1 foot of footprints, one set of footprints. And he says, Jesus, why would you leave me in this toughest of times? And he says, oh, that's when I carried you or whatever, right? And again, it's a really cheesy, dumb thing, but it's very similar to a kind of Buddhist orientation of recognizing that there is different layers by which consciousness could come to apprehend itself or understand who it is or what it is. And I think what happens in a near-death experience is people undergo something, but they misunderstand the experience that they have. So they have this very profound experience of the boundaries between past, present, and future. It's like the consciousness starts to not worry about those kinds of distinctions and it lets them go. And the same with the distinctions between literal and figurative, and the same with the distinctions between what I'm directly experiencing and what someone has told me and what I'm remembering and what I watched on TV one night. And all of it just starts to blur together into a kind of puddle of simultaneous symbolism that is like it's a collective register of the person's experience. And in that dissolve of ego that's crystallized there, the person, I think, it's easy for a person to have this kind of religious experience and then they believe that there's a soul that's somehow outside of the body, that transcends existence. But I don't think it's any of that. What they're really discovering is that they were never the ego, that the ego was a kind of illusion, that they're really a kind of world consciousness. The whole world consciousness that contains all of that is who they are, but they've narrowed themselves down to identify with this little crystallized ego that likes some things and dislikes other things and plays favorites about this and, has fashionable tastes and all this kind of stuff.
Are distinctions real? Or are they just assigned?
No, they're very real.
I mean, independent of the self-reflective creature that recognizes a distinction.
No, but self-reflexive creatures are natural to existence. I think part of the problem is to be able to do the dialectic whereby we grant reality to distinctions, realizing that distinctions emerge out of an organism's consciousness. But consciousness is indigenous to nature. I mean, some of it is we're speaking too abstractly and too generally, too universally. It could be that which distinctions in which way. There's certain kinds of distinctions that I think we want to say are what we are going to call mind-independent reality, ironically there. But there are other things that we're going to admit that we make them up. I mean, the distinctions, just for example, of north and south are qualitatively different than left and right. I mean, left and right, they really took you a great amount to learn when you were a youth, but we know that most organisms orient according to north and south. I mean, there's all kinds of orientations that culturally we've kind of covered over what as organisms we were maybe more naturally aligned to. I don't think though that any of that means that culture is somehow not natural. It means that as you move into increasing levels of complexity and self-legislation and autonomy, there are like increased degrees of space making and time making. I mean, part of it has to do with what is space and time and how does each form of consciousness create a space-time manifestation for itself. And I think that, from my own argument or my own reading or sensibility of it is that the human being has the vastest, most robust, and I guess infinite sense of space and time. And then that has to do with not simply the senses, but with language and then the way communication technologies have altered those relationships.
Do space and time exist?
No.
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 All right. So
space and time are they're co-constituted through sensory capacities. Each sensory organ has its own spatiality and temporality. I mean, the difference of the space-time of the ear and the eye and the hand, it's your body's capacity to integrate through an intermodality, synthesizing those that covers over the radical differences. But they're, in fact, highly, highly different space-times there.
Is there any such thing as time? Is there any such thing as separation?
Time has to do with
It's relative, right?
relatedness, with rates of change. I mean, Aristotle defines time as counting accompanying movement with reference to the prior and to the later. And so, whenever you have time, you'll always have a movement and accompanying that move that or a counting that accompanies that movement. But what's odd is that in those kinds of time, which I would call in self-and authenticity, I would try to deal with that in terms of measured time. Whenever you have measured time, you always have a person or a consciousness who's there prior and then begins the temporal counting sequence, and then the person ends the temporal sequence, and then we measure the amount of time lapsed. And so all forms of measured time have that dimension. But when you move to existence, it has neither of those characteristics. That is, and this is why the gift character comes in again, that each of us is thrown into existence and no person is there from the bottom up. None of us was there like pre-existing the world and was asked to be born. Instead, by the time we find ourselves, we find we've always already begun, and the having already begun is the characteristic of it. And in the same way, there's always a still outstanding, a not yet, that's part of my existence, such that if I ever get to the end, I'm really not at the end yet. I mean, it's sort of like if I go, I'm dead, well, I'm not yet. The still outstanding is part of existence. To be fully complete is to no longer be. So it's the qualitative distinction between the existence, which is a kind of temporality, which we are, and we can characterize that. We can also do it, language has many of those same properties that the human existence does, which this is very, very different than any form of measured time. And this is very different than, when you go to things like zoo semiotics, or you go to the international study of time, you look at, to Fraser's work, and, look at some of the ways that people try to study chemical processes, just the amount of time that sugar takes to dissolve, for example, or when you start to look at seasonal rhythms in the way that plants communicate through different forms of chronometers. I mean, even in your body, every cell in your body has a certain kind of time register, and time is part of conscious experience. That is, if you are a person and you have never traveled anywhere but, say, a 10-mile radius of your home, and some other person has been in planes every day of their life and they just jet set around, all around the globe, not in a way that any one of us would notice, but physically, I mean, the actual physicist would tell you, in some way, that person who is moving faster is actually younger.
But overall, there is no time. I mean,
well, for who?
Right, exactly. I mean, like, what's the time in the universe?
Yeah, for who?
What about the idea that there's really only just one moment?
Let me ask you this. Why is it that some people find it impossible to believe that the universe is so old? I mean, why are there people who believe that the universe is only 6,000 or 7,000 years old? I mean, why does that even seem plausible to them, or to even try to speak of it being a million years old? They just can't buy it. What is that? What does that tell you about time?
But yeah, that's why I don't really buy into time. I think it's really just like a one ever sustained moment that things decay in and out of.
Yeah.
Things have rates of decay, just like if you throw a rock into the water, it splash in a ripple and then it smooths out.
There'd be only one moment if there were only one consciousness.
Is there not just one consciousness, or is there separation? That's another thing that we can get into. Are things really separated from one another?
Yes.
Yes.
They're both separate and they're not. I mean, when you throw one rock into the ripples, it makes a bunch of ripples there. Are there many ripples, or are there just one? I mean, your mind is the movement that makes the illusion for time.
Is there any separation between what the mind perceives and the mind itself?
It depends. It depends on what we're talking about. I think it's too abstract.
Oh, we're talking about everything. Anything a mind perceives
No, I think the mind perceives different kinds of things. It's part of I think the insight that Wittgenstein got to later in his life was that when you look at a dictionary, you can get fooled into thinking that all words are of the same sort, of the same order. It's like they're all neutralized in visual space, as if words just are a uniform tool having a single kind of function. And he started to realize increasingly, which ended up becoming subsequently speech genre theory and speech act theory, and realization of the many different kinds of things that you do with words, that words are a kind of action in some places where one gives a promise. In other kinds of cases, it's not a promise, it's a command. In other kinds of places, it's a declaration. And in other kinds of places, it's a declarative statement. And each one of these performs a different kind of thing. And there's a difference between me giving a declarative statement about some fact of the matter that we all agree is presumably independent of us, as opposed to me giving a promise to a person about how I intend to act with regard to something I previously said. Mm-hmm. See, one, it really is sort of circling back into, I guess, the way that we create contracts and promises and deeds with one another, but others are, it's more like the way that we build bridges. They have to do with structural integrity of a world that I think we do want to say goes on independent of us. My trust of a bridge is very different than my trust of a person.
So is there a reality going on independent of you?
Does it need to be? I don't need the bridge to be independent of me, but I can still make a difference between a bridge and a person. Neither of them are a mind-independent reality, but for purposes of discussion, we could talk about one being independent of the mind and the other being, a person. So, I think this is why legal, when you deal in the world of legal disputes and just all kinds of litigation, we have to make a difference between interactions with persons and non-persons for that reason. Many non-persons are taken to be mind-independent. Let's try it that way.
Many non-persons?
Correct. When you're talking about the agency of a non-person, a lightning strikes, a tree fell, a whatever it is, it's not going to get treated as a person in a way that, and when we say it's not going to get treated as a person, we're going to go, look, this is something that happens.
Are these events, these non-agency events, existing on their own independent of the mind?
See, I guess sometimes when we get into this haggle with and it depends on how it's framed, but there is a question of, how do you know that there aren't dragons in your socks? Or how do you know you don't have little leprechauns in your pockets? You can pull a sort of skeptic's game of how is one assured about knowledge for which one isn't right now consciously experiencing or aware. But that's so different than to try to move to the constitutive point of how is it that what you are experiencing right here, right now, partly what you're doing. It's not that you're making it up, but you are co-constituting what you do experience. Because as soon as you move it into that latter realm, all of that skeptical stuff, it's like it doesn't even make sense to me, Sage. It's like the more that somebody wants to say something like, well, is it there independent of people? I'd want to go, well, who would ever have to deal with that? Who wants to know and who is going to have to live in the world that's independent of people? That doesn't even make sense.
Don't you think it's kind of like a leap of faith to assume that there is reality independent of the mind when our source of reality is only a source of reality because of a mind? To take from that to say, okay, well, what I'm perceiving is separate from me, isn't that kind of a leap of faith?
Well, I know, but there's already a leap of faith in trying to separate off the mind from the stuff. It's taking words way too seriously. There never was. We could say that there never was a nature independent of a mind, but only because there never was a mind independent of a nature, and both of those are just words coming out of my mouth.
Right.
I mean, we could say there obviously is something there, but even there, something is just a very abstract word. And it's not relativism. See, I think too many people, they haven't thought about it other than the way popular press talks about it, and they hear something like relativism or postmodernism or something like this, and I would, not only is the bulk of my work basically anti-postmodernist and or trying to critique it, but it's trying to bring people into alignment with latest developments of 21st century science, modern science. Okay, let's go back to there's no reality that's independent of mind.
Right.
Okay, so what exactly does that mean? What exactly does that imply? Does that mean that everything's freewheeling? That there are no standards by which people can judge, that it comes down to your opinion and my opinion? Does that mean that it's all individual minds rather than something like a social collective mind, or rather than something like a social collective mind able to postulate what we're going to call an ideal mind, and we're going to set up this ideal mind as a condition of intelligibility for our discourse? I mean, there's so many different ways that it gets managed.
I mean, can there be a reality? Well, I mean, a reality is something that can only be recognized through a mind. So how could there be a reality with a mind not there?
Can there be anything without language?
All right, so if you subtract the words, if you subtract language, using language to...
Yeah, if you use language to try to erase itself, now you're starting to get somewhere.
Let's talk about that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think we start to realize that speech it's a self-astonishing elemental force, and it's the vehicle that articulates consciousness in the same way that precipitates give meaning and shape and form to the weather. I mean, the weather is an ongoing change of forms, and it gives nutrients. I think consciousness is so much like the weather, that a consciousness that couldn't be changed would be no consciousness at all, and a weather that would never be changed wouldn't be the weather. I mean, your consciousness is akin to a kind of elemental force that continuously moves.
Are these tangible changes, or are they just superficial changes?
They're absolutely essential to consciousness. A consciousness which wouldn't sleep would be no consciousness at all. A consciousness that couldn't grow tired or couldn't be hungry or couldn't be distracted. All of these kinds of features that we think of consciousness, they're all part of the ebb and flow of the dynamic of life. I mean, consciousness isn't a thing.
So what is consciousness, if not a thing?
Yeah, consciousness is a self-astonishing elemental force. It's a world process by which space and time become articulately lived through meaningfully.
All right, well, let's talk about nothing then. Because you made 3 videos on it a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And it ruffled a lot of feathers. It's been a while since I've seen them.
Yeah.
But I was just curious if you wanted to reiterate what you were trying to point out in those videos. What's your idea of nothing?
Well, I tell you, I love the nothingness stuff. It's my pet lately. I am working on a long-term book project. I've been working on it many years. And there's so many people who've written on nothing. And I guess a lot of the videos that I posted were originally just... I wish I could say they were original. I wish I could say they were mine. I think some of them maybe are. I don't know. They're more of my attempt to just explain Sartre's work. That for Sartre, consciousness is a special kind of nothing. It's a room-making nothingness. And as a nothingness, he says consciousness is what it is not and is not what it is what it is not and is not what it is. And that's its being. Its being is to collapse and to make room for everything. And to me, it's just wonderful, wonderful description of what consciousness must be. Consciousness is nothing but the world. It's everything else. It's so thoroughly nothing that it makes room for everything. And what's so important to understand all of Sartre and the continental philosophy is that in the Anglican over here in the U.S. and in a lot of American philosophy, they have a tendency to put mind inside the body and then put the world outside there as if it's like a thing. And then they'll say that the mind represents the world, and they'll take mind and consciousness almost synonymously. So it's sort of like they'll say mind or consciousness, it represents the world. And they just think that way. Whereas that's not at all. I mean, that you just could be completely confused, just baffled if you try to understand Sartre or the continental tradition that way. What they're going to say is, no, what there is consciousness, and consciousness is nothing, and it's nothing but its intended objects. And then it has different kinds of intended objects. Some of those are mental phenomena, some of them are physical phenomena. But in either case, consciousness is intending phenomena. Again, mental or physical. But it's nothing but those.
Nothingness is kind of, would you say, like an ultimate taboo for human beings?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people think of it as the end. They don't think of it as a generative, room-making, forcing bed for creativity, things like this. I think they think of it as the nothingness that can be thought while alive, which seems like a horrible thing, probably. It's like an absence or a lack or a,
Because nothingness is really nothing that we can label. To say what real nothingness is something that's completely outside of all label systems of mankind.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, nothingness has gotten a bad rap. People are all anti-nothingness when they owe their very lives, their selves, their ethics and morality to nothing. That is, without nothing, they wouldn't be moral beings. They wouldn't even be themselves. It's what Kenneth Burke called the thou shalt nots.
Mm-hmm.
The thou shalt nots, the hortatory don'ts. He also calls it the Mosaic Decalogue or the Ten Commandments. They're collections of what you're not supposed to do. And when you tell some person not to do something, you create time. You create the time between the command and its obedience. Subjectivity is only to be found in the time between a command and its obedience. Thought is basically the master dealer of nothing. When you're thinking about things, you're kind of dealing with them in terms of what they're not.
Yeah.
Time and thought and nothing. That is, if you couldn't imagine taking a different course of action, if you couldn't think about the path you didn't take or might take, you wouldn't feel the meaningfulness and the moral impulse of your action. It's only because you can look down and as you're deliberating about to eat a candy bar, you can go, I really shouldn't eat this. And then later, when you didn't eat it, you can go, wow, I'm glad I didn't eat it. But there's no such thing as not eating a candy bar. You just did whatever you did.
Right.
I mean, imagine a person who sets up a camera and they're going to videotape you all day long. And they don't know that you've taken a secret vow to not swear. Now, there's no way to capture you not swearing. You simply say whatever you say. Not swearing is somehow something that we can imagine because we can imagine the swear that never happened, but that's what makes the possibility of morality, the ability to imagine other than what we do.
Yeah, morality, that's another one.
Morality is possible through the nothingness that thought and time are. Thought and time are a kind of room-making nothingness that is morality.
So, right, so then this really brings us around to that. At a fundamental level, there are no distinctions, there are no values, there are no purposes, meanings. Period. Well, who's the who?
Who are you?
Right. Am I this character that I'm talking to you through? Is that who I am?
You're not you're not one thing and you're not many things. You're both one and many, and that's the problem.
And
That there is a universal you that we can all get om and snap our fingers and go dig it. But there's another you that is a social political you that has a gender, that has an age, that other people can identify after you've been hit by a bus. I mean, you don't even have to be there for it. They can pin you out and they'll tell you the spatial coordinates. I mean, how can other people identify you by toe tag even when you're not there to claim yourself?
yeah. All right, but the individual me, the cosmic me, aren't these just a big nothing?
No. See, this is what's so crucial for Sartre, is that when you move to Sartre, Sartre has his ontology is tripart. It's being in itself, being for itself, and being for others. Being for others is actually part of your being, even though it eludes you. That is, you are a body as an object, and that is part of you. It flees from you, but yet it is you. And many people, he would say, are sadists. They want to say, no, I'm nothing but what I think of myself. I have exclusive possession of myself. Other people, they're masochists. They just run around and go, yep, whatever other people say, I'm nothing but that. I'm just a pure object in the world, ready for others to be hailed. But he would say both of those are bad faith. The truth is that you are both completely in possession of yourself as the poursoir, as consciousness, as a freedom, and as a flight, as a kind of responsibility, but also you are a thing amidst the world. You're subject to all of the conditions of the physical laws and everything else. Others can shoot an arrow at you from a distance without you seeing them.
All right, so there's duality within non-duality.
Correct.
But isn't the non-duality in nothing?
No, I think the non-duality is in both, because nothing separates me from others.
Well, it's simultaneous oneness and separation at the same time.
Right.
But what is the context of the simultaneous oneness and separation at the same time?
I don't think it sits still.
Doesn't it need a...
I think it's, for me, in my own work anyway, I think it's ambiguous. I am unable to resolve it into a one or a many, because what you really got to do is go netty.
What do you mean, netty?
Netty is the word that means not that, not that. You got to tease your mind out of the categories that you're trying to use. There's an attempt of the mind to try to resolve what's fundamentally other than mind in terms of mind.
But you're really not going to get any answers by sifting through details of phenomenal content, though, will you?
No, I'm just telling you, netty, don't go there, man. It's not one, it's not many. It's you're right now using your mind, but you have a broken one. You're not going to be able to get there from there.
All right, so what about subtraction? I know you've talked about reductionism in the past, the limits of reductionism.
Yeah.
What is your take on this?
Well, I mean, I guess my sense of the concern of reductionism is that I think there has been such a growth of knowledge, and it's very valuable, but it's created over-specialization in some areas that have led to very reductive accounts of consciousness. And so when I'm usually speaking against reductionism, the beef that I largely have is people who think they're going to be able to understand consciousness by reducing it to the brain. Not only do I think that consciousness is not in the brain, but I think there's never been a brain independent of multiple brains, and there's never been a whole set of brains independent of a historicity and a culture. And so I think one really has to deal with some of the larger problems of what Peirce and other semioticians would recognize as sort of this semiosis, an organic semiosis between organisms that's going on. It's a very complex organic process. And so I'm not trying to be anti-scientific so much as suggest that the materialist orientation toward consciousness, from my perspective, is going to fail. It's going to fail. You're not going to build it up from bits from top, from accumulating little bits. There seems to be something about history which is holistic in its very nature.
Well, that's the thing is I don't think you can really point to any one particular thing within our inventory as the factor that is what manifested everything.
But I think it helps to go back to the original discussion we were having a little bit ago about to what extent is consciousness environmental and or something akin to the weather. I think the more that people could think about their consciousness as an elemental force and the natural ebbs and changes and flows of it, and it's sometimes partly cloudy and sometimes it's shady and sometimes it's clear day and all these kinds of things that's really a little bit more, I guess, going in the right direction as far as anti-reductionism, because part of the reason weather prediction is so difficult is that you can't just take one little part and try to piecemeal it together. The whole thing is a complex whole, all moving simultaneously.
What about subtraction, detachment, letting go, introspectively? Of your
Best, love it, all of them. Those are great. To learn how to become as best one can, egoless, to learn what David Bohm calls proprioception, to learn how to observe consciousness. Lots of wonderful, wonderful strategies. David K. Reynolds' work on dealing with Shinki Shitsu, the learning how to just accept one's feelings, look at the world, and do what the world needs doing. He says we need to learn to see ourselves as the way that reality gets reality's work done. And we're clearings. And he says, you find me a neurotic, and I'll show you someone who needs their closet cleaned. He's got these great comments about how many people whose lives are really a wreck, and then you look at them and their immediate world is a wreck. And I mean, some of his stuff, I think, it's very Japanese, it's very regimented, it's sort of maybe overly regimented for a lot of contemporary Western minds. But I think what he's saying is very right-minded, that there are forms of mental hygiene and therapeutic practice that it comes by way of self-relation through taking care of one's immediate world. And it can be just doing the dishes, it can be cleaning one's house, it could be whittling or doing handiwork, it could be working in the garage. It can be pretty menial labor, but as long as it has a conscious focusedness to it, it can be a very good strategy of, again, mental wellness.
Where do you part ways with Eastern philosophy?
I guess some of it has to do with the degree to which I don't know if I'd call it Eastern. I guess I would call myself, if I had to, camp myself, I could do something like that. But I'm more akin, or I would like to see myself more akin to the Bodhisattva than to the Buddha. I do see myself as more interested in engaging in the world and trying to make the world better as best it can be from within the drama, from within some of the play. I don't think I'm going to advocate that people pick up a begging bowl and disavow secular life and all this kind of stuff. It depends upon what one means by Eastern thought. I guess I also do think if there's a single person who I'd want to maybe pull out, it would be Kierkegaard. I think Kierkegaard, for me, or I think for many people, he really registers in a Western way one of the problems that I think is now infecting the East, but it's the degree to which individuation and inwardness and the individual's life journey, all of these have taken on a kind of spiritual significance. It has to do with widespread literacy and the kind of self-relation that literacy makes, but there does seem to be a different kind of spirituality that the West has ushered in through literacy than, I guess, a lot of the nature-oriented traditions predominantly in the East. And even in Eastern traditions. I think it would take a long time to get into it, but there is a pretty significant difference between alphabetic writing and ideographic writing. I mean, I guess I see myself as deeply Western. I see myself as hopelessly, I guess, in some way, literate and caught within a tradition of literate orientations that are their own kind of spiritual potentiality. I mean, Walter Ong's work is also very good at this. He says that one way to understand, the dying and being born again has to deal with the way that we're to understand the drift from the oral word to the written and then the printed word, that each one of these is a kind of death and resurrection of of the logos. Once literacy sets in, the spoken word dies, but it's resurrected with a new kind of power, and it's disembodied in a certain way. I mean, there's sort of disguised metaphors of people trying to account for changes in consciousness. I mean, the difference between the oral word and the written word is very, very significant. And a lot of Eastern philosophy is still grounded in the oral word. Even that which is grounded in the literate, it's an ideographic literate. So like the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching has so many different translations, and the figurative is the rule for the translation. Whereas alphabeticy, it's not just the uniformity and linearity and seriality, but it introduced a kind of, I guess, individual inward literalism that I don't think there's any escaping for those of us who grew up Western. If you've grown up Western, I mean, I think we could try to recover, different strategies and learn about the East and other stuff. And there's another part of me that, I'm in my 40s. I realize, I'm Western, man.
Well, put it this way. I mean, let's parallel it to your dreams at night when you sleep. You go to sleep, you dream. You might have a rich, complex dream full of narratives and other people and substances and a lot of words spoken and different sequences. But really, what's going on overall? It's just a dream. No matter what we say, no matter how we try to define things or distinctions that we assign or values or morals, overall it's just a fabrication. Okay. You wake up the next day, you realize, oh, that was just a dream, even though you were very caught up in it, you thought it was real. Nothing in that dream could have told you otherwise. The only way you might realize it's a dream is if you go lucid in the dream and realize you're dreaming while you're dreaming, at which point all that narrative kind of just drops away because you realize, hey, I'm dreaming. And so
now you realize that you're dreaming. Are you still dreaming when you realize that you're dreaming?
Yes, you realize you're dreaming while
Who is? Is the you in the dream aware of the you who's sleeping? Who exactly is aware of the you who's in the dream?
Well, it's not the dream persona, because you realize part of that lucidity, you realize you are not this dream persona and you are not this dream world.
No, because the real you would go, wow, I'm really laying in the bed right now, and I'm wearing this color underwear, and I mean, see. The disparity between, there's this multi-leveledness. I think there's a three-card, from my perspective, there's a three-card Monty going on when you say that all the distinctions are sort of made up because this whole narrative is predicated upon a bedrock distinction between dreams and not dreams.
Well, I would say that our waking reality is no different than that. That you're not really in a bed.
I mean, if the claim is that basically all of life is a dream in the mind of God and that each person's consciousness is a kind of ongoing fragment and that at the end of the world, God will wake up and if you're lucky, maybe you'll be a happy memory that God will think, oh yeah, that was a good dream or something. I mean, I don't know. It's sort of classic Eastern philosophy. I don't have a problem with it. I just, I mean, I don't know what the point of it is,
Well, there is no point.
I mean, I always think of it, that to discover that one's true self is the world possibility, this kind of global consciousness that makes possible the ego, it makes possible this sense of self. I think that's hot and useful, and I'm all for it. But I think to along the way say that I'm so much that I forget the reality of the narrative. It's to make that mistake. I mean, the most famous example I know that illustrates it is the story that Joseph Campbell tells, right? He says there's the young man who goes to India and he realizes that he is God, that he is Atman, the center of, the creator, and he's so elated by his enlightenment that he's running down the street yelling, "I am God, I am the supreme being." And as he's yelling this, a guy who's on the top of a wild elephant yelling, "Look out, wild elephant, look out, wild elephant." And this elephant's running at this guy, and then this guy thinks, well, what do I have to worry about? I am God, and the elephant grabs him in the trunk and throws him in the ditch, and this guy lands on his head, and he's like, what the hell? And he goes back to the guru, and he says, "Guru, I don't know what happened here. I just got bumped on my head. I don't know what happened." He says, and the guru says, "Well, what happened to you?" And he says, "Well, I was realizing I was God, and this elephant came and threw me." And he says, "Well, now look, you discovered that you was God, right?" And he says, "Yeah." And he says, "Now, you also know that all things are God, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Well, then why didn't you listen to God yell? Why didn't you listen to God telling you, 'Look out, there's a wild elephant'?" And see, there's this sense in which once you spin it all the way back down to everyone else is moving out of that, well, then we're still back to the, once we've reshifted the frame, we're still back to the reality of the dream. Meaning that the game goes on, that I can continue to joyfully participate in the sorrows of humanity, try to alleviate the injustices, do all these things, realize that it is a kind of play, but also, know that there are certain things that if I, Corey, don't do, they won't be done. See, there's certain ways of the thinking about myself that's very Western, which is to say that I'm a unique, non-replaceable individual, that I occupy a very unique space and time, and I mean a social space and time, that I have certain privileges and obligations and responsibility that all hinge upon the reality of the distinctions. And I'm shirking my responsibility if I go, "Oh, we're all just one, man."
You said there is no space and time earlier.
No.
You didn't?
No, I did not. I said, for who?
Okay.
Are there other people in the world? Oh boy, see, you're going to say there aren't. See, this is where this is why I find some Eastern religions to be toxic. That is absolutely poisonous.
Because they're saying there's really just a oneness. There is no separation. How could that be toxic? Because where does your sense of responsibility come from?
The wisdom comes from recognizing it's both. It's both. You are one, but you're also many. That is, you do have individuation. See, this is why YouTube makes me a little nervous. I mean, this is fine, we're doing this, but people who rely upon anonymity, it's weird. The anonymity is a kind of prejudice that the modern media is introducing, which is cutting against some of the facts of individuation, of uniqueness of one's occurrence. It's a way of shirking accountability, responsibility, and ownership of claims. I understand there's lots of reasons for it. I don't want to say there's single reasons. There's lots of reasons people need to protect their privacy. Don't get me wrong. But I think to not see it for some of the complexities, I think that's to just see it as a glowing, wonderful thing. And anonymity is beautiful. And in fact, anonymity is more like divine consciousness. That's, I would say, horse feathers. No, I mean it, man. This is the kind of stuff that makes for people taking advantage of doing horrible things in the name of that anonymity with very particular interests. Oh, man, oh boy, I'm telling you, this stuff is very insidious.
Really?
Yes, I'm really serious. You've really hit a nerve upon the way these communication technologies are allowing people to take all the advantages of individual interests while the cloak of anonymity. It's absolutely horrifying. This is what's really happening.
You mean like through blogging and writing? Because like most people that do videos, they're not really anonymous.
Who owns most of what you're watching? When you go watch a commercial and then you see that the television show and then the three products that were advertised and the whatnot, they're all owned by the same person.
Yeah.
The lack of transparency is it's being utilized for partisan interests. And see, now what they're going to say is, yeah, look, it's both. Well, no, there it's neither. There's the person's wanting it with neither. No, I think there is something about the evolution of consciousness such that, and in nature it seems like nature longed for it, but that individuality and increasingly individualism, it came to pass. Now, whether it came to pass 5,000 years ago or 3,000 or 2,000 or just a couple of hundred years ago, I think there is a reality of the historical individual that's increasingly a spiritual reality that wasn't a reality 50,000 years ago or even say 10,000 years ago. I think there was a collective spiritual, how do I say it, that one's spiritual quest was largely caught within collectivist life, largely caught within communal values. It's been increasingly, though, existentialized. It's been individualized and brought down to an individual cosmos kind of problem.
Is there any such thing as an individual, though? And where do you draw that line?
I think there are. Well, they're as real as Social Security cards are. They're as real as various forms of social and political apparatus that can be brought to bear for biological individuation.
So the individual, is that the ego?
No.
Is it the physical body?
No. The individual is the social and historical technologies by which one's biological uniqueness can be kept constantly registered, monitored, and policed.
So the borders of an individual are, what would the outline of an individual be defined as? Just, how it fits into the narrative?
Yeah. I mean, an individual, commonly they'll have various name changes according to different stages of life. It could be baptismal name, then, confirmation name, marriage name. They could have various titles granted to them professionally. I think all of those kinds of dynamics by which individual accomplishment gets registered and recognized. I mean, I don't think people realize, do you realize that sizes of clothing they're about 100 years old? Everything throughout history, up until around 100 years ago, was either made for you or was a hand-me-down. I mean, the universality of just, I'm a 32 long, or just going into a store and buying something off the rack, very, very modern, ultra-modern. Standard uniform clothing sizes. You still get it even in Europe. I mean, if you travel to Europe a lot, where, European clothing, they don't have a standard size. Whoever makes it, they go, it's a 10, this is a 13, this is a 12. Whatever, they put a number on the thing. Large.
How would you define existence?
Existence is a tough one for me because I've been probably too heavily influenced by a lot of people that it means something very particular for me. I think for a lot of people, existence just is synonymous with life. And existence in the phenomenological tradition, it means, what does it mean? Existence means historicity of throne responsibility and of a finitude where you're aware of your own death and you're able to, by that awareness of your own death, pull yourself out of the collective that you've been thrown into. That is, you are a clearing of the world, but everyone is a clearing of the world. Well, how do you realize that you're different than other people? Well, you run ahead of yourself to your own death. And once you realize that you will die, you realize the extent to which you're not interchangeable with other people. And that's what existence is. Existence is realizing the fundamental non-interchangeability that you have with other people in terms of awareness of your own death. And in terms of a temporal stretching along, it's seeing your life as having been thrown into and stretching along toward a not yet ultimate demise. Yeah, existence isn't. That's why, when Heidegger says tables and chairs don't exist, he doesn't deny the extant materiality of a table or chair. He would just say you're making a category existence, like a category mistake when you use existence for the kind of being of a thing. He would even say that something that's living doesn't exist. Now things that exist have to live, but the living is a category for the biological, where you have biological beginning, stages of growth and development, biological cessation, but they don't yet exist. Only historical beings who have angst and can suffer the problem of not knowing what to do with themselves, of being caught in the problem of what to do with one's existence given the fact of awareness of one's death and feeling as if one is supposed to do something with it.
Is agency, is it free or determined? What do you think?
I guess both. I think people who are strategic agents learn how to anticipate what might be but yet isn't the case and head it off. So a lot of people make things happen by heading off what didn't happen. And because of that, you don't notice the agency. But yeah, lots of people who are very powerful agents are basically experts at dealing with nothing. Next time you see some glass and you think, oh boy, that's too close to the edge, it might fall, and you go and you push it over, no one will see that it didn't fall, but that's exactly what you wanted.
Now, how are you? Do you have any experience in meditation?
Sure.
How deep have you gone into it?
I don't know. I meditate all the time.
Well, I don't mean contemplation now.
Yeah, I would
to disconnect from the biology and the psychology.
Yeah, I understand. I don't know. Some people think a lot, other people don't think a lot. I think anybody who is an avid thinker and they really think a lot, they've probably, at least in their 20s, somewhere along the way, they've discovered meditation.
Well, I don't mean thinking now. I mean disconnecting from thinking. What can be found when you subtract all this complexity?
I think what you find is, divine consciousness aware of itself. There's, like I said, in the near-death experience, I don't know why, but I think some people end up thinking that they are going to live on after their death or something, instead of seeing what really happened, which was the dissolve of all of those boundaries within consciousness, including the crystallization of ego that seemed separate from all of the, I guess, flotsam and jetsam that make up the stream and the whole composition of consciousness. It's like you are world consciousness that gets trivialized down into a little stream when you, I don't know, just live your life. I don't think you can live the near-death experience. I don't think you can live the I-thou moment. When you look at Buber's work, he says that a person who does not live, he says you cannot live in the I-thou, but if you live only by I-it, you're not really a person. But if you try to live in the I-thou, your life would be lost within a day.
Are we people?
Are people?
Am I a person? Are you a person? Really?
I mean, when you say really, I don't know what you mean.
Is this just a
I think
persona?
you want to disambiguate it once and for all, and I don't think life is once and for all disambiguated. If it were, it wouldn't be what it is. I think it resists such once and for allness.
Well, I don't think it can be resolved
Right.
through, yeah, phenomenal content. I don't think it can be resolved through intricacies or pointing toward an inventory item. I think you can get to the bottom of it by beginning to let go of that stuff. Because how could it
What's the
be?
bottom of it?
How could it be? Whatever's at the bottom of it, it can't be anything you can point at, right?
Well, who? Right. Well, yeah. See, the language is all. I mean, who couldn't? Part of it is.
Well, there is no who, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, well, I think exactly. I think part of the problem is that it's a classic. This is like an old. This one's got dinosaur poop on it. I mean, is it one? Is it many? Well, it's both.
And also
It's
none of it,
both.
right?
What's that?
It's one, it's many, but it's really none of it.
Right, exactly. Netty, 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 netty. You can't go there.
It's this, it's that, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that, but it's none of that.
Right. I mean, D.T. Suzuki tells the famous story of the two Zen monks, and they were arguing over the flag wave, and the one said, the flag was waving, and the other said, no, it's the wind was waving, and they were haggling back and forth, and went up to the master, and they said, was it the wind or was it the flag? And the master said, no, your mind was moving. I mean, it's the classic.
Yeah, and that brings us back to nothing again.
Yeah. I mean, nothing is real. Nothing is the way that all that is makes room for itself in particular relatedness. Because otherwise it would be too full of itself.
It can't necessarily be any of those things that you just said either. I mean, can nothing really be anything that we can speak?
No, we're animals chattering noises. This is all stuff we're taking seriously.
I mean,
and yet, on the other sense, it's, nature did produce flowers of the mouth, which have a kind of fragrance we call intelligibility.
But they don't have any tangible existence. I mean, if you're going to say that they exist and they're happening, then you got to start answering all these questions. Okay, well, where exactly?
Well, could they be? Words are as real as mind is.
Answer like who? Who?
That's right. Speech is a who, not a what or a how. It was one of my first publications way back in the 97, 96. My first publication was that speech is a who, not a what or a how. That's why it eludes people.
And none of those questions could really be answered. The who, what, when, where, why, and how of existence.
We're the people who speak who raise the questions. I mean, to ask that language, to ask that we provide a question with an answer beyond language wouldn't be fair, but if the question comes from language, there's nothing wrong with asking for an answer in language as well.
Like who's the
who? There's a part where in Kenneth Burke's Rhetoric of Religion, it's in the epilogue, where he has the Lord and Satan arguing over the word animal. And Satan says to the Lord, he says, Lord, I just don't get why you care if people pray. And the Lord says, what do you mean? And Satan says, look, these are silly little animals chattering noises. A word like everything or all would be more than to choke them. They can't possibly mean you when they say you. Why would you care if they pray? And he says to the Lord says back to Satan, he says, oh, Satan, you're my favorite pupil. He says, you must agree that even if these language-using animals were doing nothing more than reflecting upon their linguistic forms, this could be a true inkling of the divine insofar as language itself is made in the image of divinity. And so there is a sense in which if language is of the same property of... See, language is a room-making nothingness. Language is a consciousness in the flesh. Like right now, I'm chattering noises, but you can't hear the noisiness as if it were a foreign language. What you do is you transcend the noises and you hear it as English. To that extent, the words are not what they are and they are what they're not. There's a natural transcendence built into speech. When you listen to a foreign language, you hear them, I guess, purely from the outside. But if you speak the language, you experience the language as a flesh, it's a consciousness. It's not that you hear the noises and then you go on to the words. The words negate themselves as sounds and presence, the flesh of thought itself. Sartre has so much wonderful stuff on that.
Okay.
Speech is the flesh of consciousness. It's a self-negating sounds. That is, the sounds don't sound like sounds. They somehow sound like the meaning is in there, but you know that your meaning, the meaning, like, let me try it this way. See, people sometimes do it this way. Oh, that's such a good way to come at it. See, people try to do this. They go, oh, there's no meaning in the message. The meaning comes from the interpretation that people put to the words. And so they're going to try to say that the words don't have any meaning and it's just the interpretation or the meaning that you put to the words. Yeah, that's true, but you need the words in order to speak.
The meanings are agreed upon, right?
The words are the meaning. Its reflection creates a division between the words and the thoughts.
Well,
but pre-reflectively, the words are the thoughts.
Right, the words don't just exist, though. The language is not there prior to the ones who have come and assigned these meanings and agreed upon them, though. Right?
No, of course not. No. But I think the illusion, though, is that the words have the meaning. And then the second illusion is that the meaning is just an attribution. Neither of those is correct. At first, the beginner goes, aha. They go, the first person, they go, the words have the meaning. And then they go and they travel to a foreign country and they go, wow, I guess the words weren't meaningful. It was me knowing the language. So then they go, aha, I just interpret meaning, and then they think that they're attributing meaning to the words, but that's not really right, because I can sit down with a book, and even though the book doesn't use any words that I don't know, the book can somehow teach me something. Right. How can I teach myself something using words?
Yeah. How would you?
Oh, you can. I mean, otherwise you're caught with the solipsism of the baby is never able to learn the language because it's only using the meaning it already has to attribute to the words. It's somehow never able to learn the language.
At one time, things were named for the first time.
See, I know, but wait a second. When you say they're named and they're shared upon, the problem with that is that you're making it seem very, very subtly as if there was a person who shared upon those terms, but the person is one of the terms already shared upon. Language made it all up. It's a bunch of holodeck. It's all the Matrix.
If it is all a dream illusion, holodeck, Matrix, then what does that say about anything that we're talking about right now?
It says that we've watched too much TV and or visuals, that we're getting our ideas from Hollywood.
The meditation.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. You got to get meta. Watch your own mind. Where's it getting its stuff?
Well, that's where the meditation comes in. Disconnection from all of this. What can be found when I start to let go of all the programming, all the identifications, all the associations that I've attached myself to assemble this human being that I think I am. If I start to subtract all that stuff, to remain aware as I drop all this stuff, then the illusion can really be seen firsthand through direct knowing, as opposed to just a storyline taken from the content. And that's why, most meditation is misunderstood or practiced incorrectly, because people think that it's deep thinking or following the content.
No, I think it's about erosion of self. It's about loss of sense of ego.
Loss of the sense of ego that doesn't really exist to begin with.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just such a tricky. Alan Watts has a line where he says, "Imagine a torch, and now I start to whirl the torch really quickly in my hand. At a certain point, someone who's looking at the torch may see a circle. The ego is like the circle of the torch. That thought is like the flame, and it moves very quickly. And as it moves very quickly, memory produces the illusion of a thinker of the thought." In the same way, looks like the circle is creating the torch rather than the torch is like creating the circle in a residual after effect. And that's, again, it's a wonderful metaphor. And yet, if you start to push the envelope, it goes, well, what is memory, though? Memory forces the issue that, a lot of memory is pre-personal, and it's possible because there is the time in which memory can see the ego, and there's potentially, anyway, some forms of denial of responsibility, some forms of what are going to need its own form of meditative de-diluting from the possibilities that get opened up in there.
Yeah, because there's less and less to engage in. The more and more you start to drop and let go and disconnect and detach, you take responsibility, but there is no responsibility.
Well, there is, though. There is. I mean,
What
there
responsibility do you
isn't
have?
ultimately, but you could say there's mundane in very mundane ways. But in the mundane ways, that's enough.
Such as,
I don't know, getting your kid to the doctor. Something very simple. Like even right here. I mean, I should go pretty soon. I got told someone else I'm supposed to go out to lunch with somebody today.
okay,
And I mean, I could blow them off. But another part of me is I told them I would, I'd probably be free around this time. So I mean, like here, in a world where you have multiple minds and multiple consciousnesses, where you're going to make, we have calendars, and we've created calendars that fragment off our attentions and our plans and our goals. And I mean, these are all ways that I think we've made the divisions very real. Now we could say, are they ultimately real? Is there really such a thing as Sunday? Are there really Tuesdays? Is there really such a thing as 11:18 or whatever? I mean, we could go no, 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 and yet to the extent that I acknowledge and admit that there are other minds, then those things are real, independent of me. They are. Otherwise, I'm a solipsist.
well, right, you're experiencing them that way.
No, but I mean, they're historical realities.
The dream parallel. You could be dreaming, and there's all these other people that you think are
See, the
there.
dream parallel is dangerous because it's so private. We don't dream collectively.
Who's to say that life isn't a collective dream of some imaginative agency?
Well, I don't know. It wouldn't be of a collective dream. If the analogy is to the dreamer, it's a person laying alone and it's going on inside their head. The dream is some subjective experience inside the cranium. That's why dreams, for me, are a really unfortunate metaphor for consciousness, because dreams really are fully inside the head in a way that when I open my eyes and I look out, there's chemical photo energy coming from the sun that's activating my nervous system. It's very different.
But that narrative stems from the dream within the dream. You have a cranium in this life-waking dream, but is that really the case?
I think it is. I think I go to sleep and I have dreams and the dream is in my head. When I wake up, I'm looking at the world and the sun, and it's the sun I'm looking at. I'm not looking at a representation of it. I'm not somehow figuratively imagining the sun. It's the sun I'm seeing. I'm the way the sun gets to be seen.
Okay, but these things are stemming from your mind, so why would you make a leap of faith to assume that these things are independent of mind? Or you have this stream of information, this stream of images coming in.
Okay, what's it like right here, right now, as I'm talking to you?
Right now.
Okay. This is a dream?
Everything that you're receiving is through your mind.
Okay, see now, when you say this is a dream, what is my frame of reference for the non-dream? Because otherwise I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, well, death, maybe? That would
So
be.
death is the ongoing picture frame of life. To me, death isn't an eventual state. It has to do with the condition of life's meaningfulness.
I'm just saying that you can only confirm a reality via your mind, right?
I don't think at death you're going to wake up and realize your whole life had been a dream.
All right, well, but your reality is confirmed through your mind right now.
Okay.
You don't have some other way to recognize a reality independent of the mind, do you?
Okay. I'm going along here.
So
Okay.
so my question is, why would someone make a leap of faith without any evidence to assume that there's anything out there that is not linked to the mind, that it's mind independent?
Yeah, I guess. Okay, I guess what I keep trying to say is that I think there's a difference between mind independent and independent of my mind. See, I think when we say mind independent, this is like this philosopher language of, trees falling in forest when there's no one there and all this kind of stuff. That to me is very different than trying to deal with the problem of there being multiple minds, more minds than my mind. Is mind independent reality the exact same problem of, is there multiple minds? Because I think a lot of people, they have it as the same problem. They're smuggling it in by way of a thought of aliens. They think of, well, if there were no people here, but if there were aliens, then the world maybe would be here.
Well, other minds. I don't know if there's any.
That's right. See, I think once we move to the difference between, is reality mind independent, we go, okay, yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. But once we move to, are there multiple minds, meaning are there realities independent of my mind? Well, now this whole issue just swings back in the whole different. The whole kit and caboodle just comes in a different flavor, a whole different set of problems, but the same stuff. And this time we have to say yes. It is. That's how I can be late for an appointment.
Are there multiple waters?
Multiple waters?
Yeah, like if I see a bunch of beads of water, are those separate, independent water?
Yes and no. In one sense, it is a property, but if there's one glass and we're both thirsty, we can't share the water.
Well, we could split the glass. But...
I mean, the air that I'm breathing, is it mine? Is it yours? It's obviously between us, but we both can't have it.
But yeah, at the same time, we're both utilizing air.
That's right.
There's no division in air, right?
It's one and many, man.
What?
It's one and many.
It's one.
Both.
Right. So yeah, man, it's one, it's many, but is it any of that stuff?
No, those are just noises coming out of our mouths. We're little animals, and it's a big fireball in the sky, and we have no idea what any of all this is.
Are we even animals? Is there even a sun? Is there a planet? Is there
I don't know. We could be in a huge organism. I have no idea. I mean, we could be cells inside an organism.
So is your idea of nothing different than my idea of nothing?
I don't know.
If you begin to subtract and subtract and subtract, you arrive at nothing. Something that cannot be called anything, right?
What I mean by nothing, to me, nothing is the condition of possibilities for what is. That what is, if it weren't for nothing, wouldn't have any possibilities.
So maybe it's a potentiality?
Yeah, nothing.
Pure.
Nothing turns what is into what's shot through with possibilities, and thereby what has become meaningful and moral. That without nothing, you wouldn't have any time, and everything would be so what it is that there wouldn't be any meaningful regret or anticipation, all those kinds of feelings of possibility have to deal with the conditions of something that you think of happening that might not happen.
So pure potentiality.
Yeah. If I look down in the road, I see two paths, and I think, well, I could go left or I could go right. any outside observer, they would just see my continuous movement along whatever path I go. But once I go down one, I can remember and think about the path not taken.
Right.
But that, to an outside observer, they would say, you didn't go down that path. And I know, but I could think that. I could think about the possibility of having done it. Like if I say to you, here, eat whatever, if I just put food in front of you and you eat whatever's in front of you, that's so different than if I say, you can have either fish or meat. And when I give you the fish or meat, I somehow give you the one, not the other. I think one of the simplest way too is think about it is, say some person says, I'm giving up smoking. Okay, I'm going to not smoke. And then they go and they walk around in a public place and they're with a bunch of people who never smoked. And when you videotape all those people in a crowd, you can't capture the one person not smoking. All of them are equally just doing whatever they're doing. And yet for that one person, the time and the conscious experience will be of not smoking. And it will be experienced as a moral problem. Where is the not smoking? It's in the time of the thought of the person. I mean, think of people who promise to a person, they get together in a relationship, they say, I promise to not have sex with anyone else. When you keep a vow, you've created the time in which moral, meaningful action and subjectivity can be achieved. Kenneth Burke is brilliant on this. I mean, Kenneth Burke is one of the most wonderful authors on documenting how subjectivity and time and negativity all relate to one another.
Yep. And all of these things, I would say, are assigned distinctions within a nothingness, where these things do not exist prior, but are assigned into this nothingness and then take shape, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, well, there's an amorphous something which becomes articulated through the nothingness. That's how the now becomes past, present, and future, because I say the past is no longer and the future is not yet. I somehow am able to introduce divisions into the present by way of nothing.
Through mental conceptualizations of partitions, right?
Yeah, and when I say way of nothing, I mean by way of speech, and speech is its own kind of nothing. Speech is an infection of room-making nothingness. That is, what is it that separates one word from another? Nothing. What is it that separates one letter from another? Nothing. Speech infects it. Speech is its own self-erasure. I negate the sounds as sounds in a flight toward meaning.
And to have content, you need a context.
Right.
And to have a context, you would need a nothingness.
A nothingness, agreed. Because what's the backdrop for any backdrop? Nothing.
Right, exactly. And we keep following that, the backdrop of the backdrop of the backdrop.
That's right. That's right. The figure, there's always going to be a figure ground, but the ground of ground has to be nothing.
Right, and meaning not anything referenceable.
That's right, netty.
It can't be anything we can point to. It can't be.
Or it would be figure.
It can't be even empty space. What we would define that an object needs to exist to begin with would be a space to contain it. But the true nothingness can't even really be called empty space either, because you need a context for empty space also.
Yeah, I think that nothingness, again, it's got a bad rap. Nothing is a kind of,
well,
it's consciousness, time, thought, and it's the clearing by which meaningful action can be contextualized. It's the picture frame. It limbs action.
Well, it threatens all those things also, because people hold their values and their morals and their meanings and purposes very dear. And for someone to say that it's nothing kind of renders all that useless, doesn't it?
Well, I think that sort of forces the issue that there may be species of nothing. There's various kinds of non-being. I mean, there's a difference between zero and the empty set and nothing and negation. For like Anthony Wilden, just as an example, he would say that the not, the N-O-T, is in fact metalinguistic and is the prerequisite for the empty set and zero because it's the conditions by which you define those other ones.
And that's why also I think nihilism has gotten a bad rap and is almost like used as a dirty word.
Right.
And misconstrued with all sorts of pre-existing connotations. When
Right.
nihilism is just recognizing there is nothing until it is assigned. Like the ripples are not in the water until the stone is thrown. They don't pre-exist. There's no objective absolute properties to these things. These are assigned by relative
Yeah, they're relational.
perspectives.
Right. I mean, relations are as real as things. I mean, this is William James's great insight. Relations are as real as things. I think that takes, I guess, difficulty for a lot of people to get around get their heads around. But yeah, just because something isn't a thing doesn't mean it isn't real. Relations are real. That's why age is such a fascinating phenomena. When the bride and groom are getting married to youngsters who are looking at them, those people actually look old, and to grandma and grandpa, those people actually look young. And it's not like they're perceiving it as their interpretation. I mean, it's the age is perceived relative to the other person who's looking.
Well, it's all relative, isn't it? These things really are just about manifestation and decay.
I don't know if everything is relative. 2 isn't relative. I mean, 2 is 2.
The number 2?
Yes.
Well, it's relative to a person that recognizes what a 2 is and has put.
Oh, well, I know. I mean, again. There's multiple meanings, different ordinalities to the notion of relative. I mean, there's different kinds of meanings to that. The ways that ages seem relative to who's looking is very different than, again, a measurement. When we both pull out a ruler and we both look, was it 2 inches or not? It's not relative. Hopefully it's not relative to the observer. Hopefully we both agree that it was 2 inches or not.
Well, even the precise measurements that we all can agree on are relative to a framework.
Sure.
So that makes it relative, right? Because perhaps that measurement may not jibe in another part of the universe. For example.
I mean, it's, Gregory Bateson has a wonderful essay where he says you can never have exactly 3 gallons of water, but you can have exactly 3 tomatoes. I mean, you can have 3 tomatoes, but you can never have exactly 3 gallons of water. I mean, there are some things that are analog and there are some things that are digital.
Even 3 tomatoes is relative to our agreed upon chart. 3 is not an absolute, is it?
I don't know. I think we can agree that numbers are invented, numbers are created, but if we can imagine alien intelligences who could find numbers intelligible, even if you get rid of all people, numbers could still be real if we're going to imagine those other minds who find those numbers intelligible.
Right, and those numbers would be very relative to how they perceive numbers. They might have a totally different system.
I mean, we got supercomputers in space kicking out prime numbers, and they pick prime numbers for a pretty good reason. Prime numbers have very interesting properties, and I mean, there's some kind, or even just geometric ratios. Things like the golden section or pi. There are other things that maybe are more based in worldly perceptual kinds of phenomena, like geometry, as opposed to just sheerly deductive math systems. But I think in either case, I don't know if we just want to say, blanketly they're, I don't know. They get the math stuff gets very, very, very tricky.
I would say it's all relative to the human perspective.
Well, I mean, the math that we've invented is a product of our minds, but our minds are the product of the orderliness of the cosmos that then invented those numbers. And so even if we can't find numbers directly out in the world, that doesn't mean that math isn't somehow in nature. It's just that math could be etched into human brains as its indigenous place. I mean, you can have people, as an example, who are mathematical prodigies who didn't learn that math from other people.
It may be just applicable to just a grain of sand that we're calling our reality. Like you said about the other intelligent beings, they may have a completely different math system.
Right. It gets tricky. I mean, math and music, I don't know. This would take us way too far. It would take us too long. I really should go, though. I really
All right.
I appreciate you taking the time here. It was really fun.